One of the big things here in Happy Valley Goose Bay was somehow you've got, speaking to me as an MHA, you got to do something. We don't have an industry here. And as you have to remember, to put it in context, at one point, Happy Valley Goose Bay, when the military were here in force, the Americans and Canadians, the Ministry of Transport, and other departments of government, we had a population of 18,000 people, third largest town in Newfoundland and Labrador. And on top of that, in some ways, more importantly, we had the highest per capita income of any town in Canada. No one had a higher per capita income than we did. So when you live in an environment like that, and all of a sudden this vacuum exists in terms of development, and people are going to demand their rights and do it dramatically sometimes, because Labrador Linerboard wasn't working. I mean, that was, as an industry goes, that was a friggin' disgrace. It should never, ever have happened. So there was that frustration, and at one point, at the request of I don't know how many organizations here, I can't remember, we set up an organization called the Labrador Resources Advisory Council to advise government on resource development and how that development should occur.
The Lake Melville communities. These are the executive members that are present at the time. We have 2 staff employed by the Resource Council. None of the executive are employed by the Resource Council. The only 2 employees of the Resource Council, or 2.5 employees of the Resource Council. Mary Sillett, hired on in December as a researcher, and Bill Flowers, who has been with us for a year now as field worker, and Pat March has been our secretary part-time with the Resource Council.
Like uranium was the big topic at the time, and everyone is afraid of uranium and the impact of harvesting it. You know, it can be lethal. That'll kill people if it's not done properly. And on and on and on. So that, and I think that was what people focused on perhaps more than anything else, because the fishery was failing on the coast. People were still catching cod, but not a whole lot. I remember when I became fisheries minister, my last year in politics, I was talking to a gentleman was downtown St. John's. He was from around the bay somewhere, and he came to talk to me about some difficulty he had with his involvement in the fishery. And I said, look, you know, the fishery is becoming so small now that something is going to happen to it eventually, where it's going to close down or be so small that there'll only be a handful of people involved or whatever. And he said, I know all about that, Minister, because where I live, I can sit down to my supper at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, especially in the winter months when it's dark. And we have an offshore limit of 6 miles. Everything beyond that is international. And I can see the Russian factory freezer trawlers and the Japanese and all of the other countries that come here to harvest codfish, millions of pounds at a time, process it on the boat, freeze it on the boat, and go home. there's no way that the fishery is going to be able to sustain that kind of activity. And he said, I sit there at the supper table and I can't eat. I'm choking on the very fish that is my livelihood. And I can't do it. Now, the conservative government that I was a part of finally did something about the offshore limit, and it's now 200 miles offshore instead of 6 miles. But it's too late for the fishery, but in time for offshore oil and gas. So you do what you can. Sometimes it's too late. Other times it works out well. And discovering which is the better process of the two is beyond me. Someone else is going to have to judge that kind of situation, because I can't. I can't. Whether or not I'll ever be looked upon as a person who made a difference or didn't make a difference, that's not my call. That's someone else's job.